Can everybody hear me? I had a lot of people on the last video say that my volume wasn't good, so I'm going to try and project a little bit more, but I have adjusted those settings as well. So if you can hear me, let me know. Just shoot me a little message in the chat if it's a little low, if I seem to trail off or my volume gets lower. Just let me know so that I have people feeling like I'm being heard. All right, let's kick this thing off. We got a new song today, just like we had Dragon Mother Rising. I've got a new one for you today from Museus.
Started as a shepherd, now I'm sitting on a throne, while the queen of heaven's hanging cold and all alone. Thinking I could take it, thinking I could make it mine. From pastoral to capital, watch my power shine. They ain't know my father was the lord of wisdom deep. Enki son with plans to make the cosmos mine to keep. From shepherd to sovereign, watch the staff become a sword. From lover to tyrant, now they call me Lord. Now they call me Lord. But every throne's got a price to pay, and demons come to collect one day. Sister tried to warn me in the visions of the night. Saw the reeds all bending, saw my power take flight. But I was drunk on glory, drunk on heaven's wine, thinking I could transform partnership to all is mine. Now the gala coming can't escape their righteous wrath. Every shepherd king must walk that lonely path. Transform my hands, transform my feet. Let me escape what I can't defeat. But you can't run from cosmic law when you try to take what wasn't yours. This ain't just history, this pattern still remains. From balanced power to dominion's chains. Every king who claims he rules by right divine, walking in my footsteps thinking power's his to shine. But the queen of heaven's judgment echoes through the years. Every throne built on betrayal ends in tears. Started as a shepherd, ended as a shade. Cosmic usurpation is a deadly trade. Let my story warn you about the price of power, when you trade eternal truth for one brief hour. When you trade eternal truth for one brief hour. When you trade eternal truth for one brief hour. When you trade eternal truth for one brief hour.
Guys, welcome. All right, so that was the latest track from my magic robot band, Museus. Yeah, I noticed a couple people talking about it there. Do they have a YouTube or a Spotify? No, just this channel. Just this channel. That's where all the Museus stuff's coming from. Welcome, everybody. Let's get this thing started. So last night I dropped my video on Museus, or I'm sorry, on Dumuzid and Inanna. It's the second part of the Inanna's descent myth, and it's peculiar. So I wanted to talk about the entirety of Inanna's descent, but you have to break it up. because there's so much going on and there's so much context that's actually happening in the myths themselves. And so I thought once we got started with that, I was like, we have to talk about Dumuzid. He's so vital, so crucial to her mythic structure and everything that happens within her myths. So we yeah, yeah, AI music, Larry, AI music. Um, it's an AI robot world at this point, and that's just the world we live in. So Dumuzi, very important character in the myths, as the video which we launched last night talks about. Dumuzi, he basically in Inanna's descent myth, which comes from Babylon. It's a little bit later than what the original might have been. In that myth, we find him basically not mourning her. He's not mourning her. He's sometimes celebrating, depending upon the translation. My video is based on the Diane Wolkstein translation, as well as the Samuel Noah Kramer, which is it's an older translation, but it still holds up. I know there's new ones that have come out, and there's different perspectives on this. But in light of that, this Inanna myth is based on Inanna herself as being the goddess, and as Dumuzi being a representative of the mortal king. And so we're going to get into a lot today on the sacred marriage myth, and how Dumuzi factors into this, and how we see him replayed over the ages, time and time again, based on the different regions. And we're going to talk about each one of those different instances or aspects of Dumuzi as we go along. But it begins with this sacred marriage concept. So in the descent myth, we have Inanna. She's descending into the underworld. She dies. She's basically what they say, a slab of meat on a hook, and all these other deities mourn her. All these other her, Ninshubur, Shara, Lulal, everybody is mourning her in the proper fashion, but not Dumuzi. And so in this depiction, we have this character who has just married the goddess of heaven, this mortal shepherd who's just married the goddess of heaven. She comes back and everybody else is mourning her, but he's not. It's a sus look, right? It's a very suspect look. Like, why are you not doing the mourning? I think what we're dealing with here is something about character. It's something about the character of either the king, or it's an allegory for what we do as humans. What we're going to find as we explore this today is that Dumuzi is an allegory for humanity. And we see this played out time and time again in religions that follow, in the spiritual beliefs that follow this time period, that we, the people, sometimes based in a single figure like Dumuzi, which was both the title of a person, but also the king himself, married to the divine being. Of course, originally, that divine being is the goddess Inanna, the queen of heaven. And what we'll get to eventually is the people married to the God himself, God Yahweh, or even in the case of Christianity, what we're looking at, the bridegroom of Christ. It's the same story being played out time and time again. So let's look at this sacred partnership. Let's start tracing the evolution of this divine partnership from this time of Inanna and this polytheistic worship to the time of monotheism that we see in the Hebrew Bible. So what is the price? What is the price of power? Dumuzi, mortal man, becomes the consort, the lover, the shepherd of the people through this engagement of sacred marriage with Inanna. And the descent of Inanna to the underworld marks much more than just the goddess's journey. It's talking about much more. It's talking about us. It reveals the first tremors of what this patriarchal revolution is going to become. When he claims her throne in her absence, this is a warning. This is a warning. This story is a warning to us in our relationship with the divine. But what he does, and what they're so clever to understand, at least when we look at it from a more modern perspective, what they're clever in understanding is what human beings, what our human condition is likely to do when we have power. So this shepherd becoming the king, this partnership between male and female, this it's intricate harmonious balance between female, male, nature, mankind, civilization, and the earth itself, slowly gives way to mankind's dominion over everything. It slowly gives way. And we start to see the divine feminine in a slow retreat over thousands and thousands of years, or at least the importance of it to certain people. Now, what are the core mythic characteristics of Dumuzid, right? So he's basically in the myths a shepherd. He is a mortal human being who is turned into king through this sacred marriage. The courtship myth is where we pull this from, and it basically begins with Shamash, um, or Utu Shamash, talking to Inanna about, you're ready. It's time for you to take on a mate. It's time for you to get married. So she says, I don't know about this. I don't know about it, right? And she wants to marry the farmer. Well, Utu basically talks her into marrying the shepherd. So Dumuzid also takes part in this. He kind of talks himself up and says, I can do everything that the farmer can do. I can do everything that the farmer can do. And so he basically woos her. It's a story of wooing. And in that, he becomes more than just king. He becomes a god. He becomes deified in some way. He is the link between the divine and the human realm. And so it's this first instance of patriarchal revolution that we start to see in this myth. But it takes time through the centuries. So he's the shepherd, mortal man turned king. He's the consort. He doesn't rule heaven. Inanna does, but in the myth, he's like essentially sitting on her throne. And then afterwards, when he is taken to the underworld, what we start to see is the development of underworld or chthonic aspects, where he dies and is resurrected yearly. So there is the first of these dying and rising god myths associated with the vegetable god, the vegetation god, the agricultural or fertility god. And you see this play out. You see it with Osiris. You see this play out with Attis in Phrygia. You see this play out in Adonis and Aphrodite in what the Greeks call Phoenicia. And essentially, the same story plays itself out. Fertility, vegetation, and ritually mourned by women. And we'll get to that one at the end here. But what we see are a set of core characteristics. Now, I want to read to you a couple of pieces, and feel free to ask questions along the way. If you guys have anything, just let me know. I'll try to keep my eye on the chat as we keep going. I'm seeing you guys talk about it here. 3 Abrahamic religions are the outliers. I find truth in every other tradition. I tend to share the sentiment of the 3 Abrahamic religions being outliers. Certainly, they are certainly outliers from everything else, the way that everything else is kind of looking. But I still find truth in some of it. I try to find truth in everything, and that's why I do this channel the way that I do, is try to see the parallels, try to see the places where everything comes together as one. Because that's really what we're talking about. These stories, as we'll see today through this exploration, they just keep getting played out. So let's read some of this here. So this is from Pym, and this happens before the ascent, or the descent into the netherworld or underworld for Inanna. I am your battle leader. Now this is the voice of Inanna. I am your battle leader. In combat, I am your armor bearer. In the assembly, I am your advocate. On the campaign, I am your inspiration. You, the chosen shepherd of the holy shrine. You, the king, the faithful provider of Uruk. You, the light of On's great shrine. In all ways you are fit to hold your head high on the lofty die, to sit on the lapis lazuli throne, to cover your head with the holy crown, to wear long clothes on your body, to bind yourself with the garments of kingship, to carry the mace and the sword. This is her blessing. This is the blessing of the goddess on the king, on Dumuzid. Dumuzid responds, My queen, here is the choice of your heart, the king, your beloved bridegroom. May he spend long days in the sweetness of your holy loins. Give him a favorable and glorious reign. Grant him the king's throne, firm in its foundations. Grant him the shepherd's staff of judgment. Grant him the enduring crown and the radiant and noble diadem. As the farmer, let him make the fields fertile. As the shepherd, let him make the sheepfolds multiply. Under his reign, let there be vegetation. Under his reign, let there be rich grain. And actually, I misspoke there. I don't think that's actually Geshtinana or Ninshibur who brings the king in this sacred marriage ritual to the goddess. So what we're looking at here is a mythic representation of our personal divine relationship with the divine. It's our relationship as humanity, right? And it's through the vessel of the king. And this is how many of the ancient peoples thought of how we're supposed to relate. We have to have some representative. And so the Sumerian Babylonian, very much into the kingship motif. Through the king is how we access the divine. Well, sorry that you're having connection issues, Hillary. I hope it's not on my end. Anybody else having any issues seeing or hearing me? So what we have is this relationship between the king and the goddess. Now this is historically linked to the Sumerian kings list. We have a name, Dumuzid. We have a name, Dumuzid. And so the Sumerian kings list is one of those things we can't historically necessarily prove. It is a tablet that states that these kings reigned from this time to this time. So we have to kind of go on their word that this was the case. But what we have here is essentially a title. It's not just a name of a potential guy. It's the name or the title of the king, the shepherd king, that archetype. And it was an important figure in this mythic or mytho-historic milieu of the Sumerian and Babylonians. As the fifth antediluvian king of Bad Tabira and the early king of Uruk, Dumuzid held the sacred role of agriculture and economic life for the Sumerian people. He was responsible for managing crucial resources and ensuring the fertility and abundance of the land. Okay, thanks for that, Anne. I appreciate it. It might be my connection today, but I'll just keep going. So what we have is the mortal becoming divine through this divine conduit of kingship, through this blessing, through this sacred marriage. This pattern of mortal divine transformation where a king or ruler transitions from shepherd to divine consort is a prominent theme not only in ancient Sumer but everywhere else as we follow through the Near East. And we see this played out again and again. It connects earthly rulership with divine authority, so it gives both the state and the religion some sort of power. And that's where I think we go horribly wrong as people in general, when we start connecting those two forces together and making decisions based on those two being in the same team, on the same team. The checks and balances go out the window, and then we see things happen like they have over the last 2,000-3,000 years. That's just my opinion. We'll keep going. So who else do we see this archetype play out in? We see it over time, right? And I'll pull up something in a little bit here that shows how these come about throughout time. But we see it in Adonis and Aphrodite. Mortal man, mourned ritually by women, dies and resurrects annually. Death is caused by a wild boar, a little bit different over here in Phoenicia. The name is derived from the Semitic Adon, Adonai, Lord. And we will see that play out again in the Hebrew Bible. We see that played out in his name, Adonis, the Lord, the king. We see it in Attis and Sybil, resurrected lover, mourned in dramatic rituals. In this case, he self-castrates and dies instead of dragged off by demons, associated with pine trees, spring renewal, vegetative cycles, all those great things. Osiris and Isis, probably the oldest, and it goes back even further than we think. There are some people who think that idea of Osiris, the king, comes from a shepherd deity or some sort of shepherd king that was deified over time. And this way back, 5500 BCE is where that particular theory puts this. We don't know if that's necessarily the case. That's one of the opinions. But in that case, he's murdered and dismembered. So the manner in which he is killed or goes to the underworld differs based on where you are. So there's a cultural perspective, a cultural difference there. But underworld rulership is involved in all of them. Underworld aspects, chthonic aspects are involved with just about all of them. And fertility aspects are involved with just about all of them. The same with Baal and Astarte. They're basically doesn't just pick a spot in the Near East, and they're going to have a different name for the same concept. These same concepts are played out. One of the things we have to understand about the ancient world is that they are not in a vacuum. These countries are talking to each other. These empires, these cities, these different peoples, they're sharing information. In fact, most of them would probably look at us today and say, yeah, we're all talking about the same exact thing. We just have different names for it. It's not until much later, once we hit late antiquity and beyond, once we have the advent of Christianity and that full scale takeover of Christian and imperial Roman forces, that we start to see people say, no, we're talking about different things. Most people in late antiquity would say to you, and I think this is pretty clear in their writing, it's Osiris is Dionysus, Adonis is Dumuzid. All these things are the same things. We just have our slight cultural spin on it. So what we're looking at, and we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at this, because we have a tendency in modern discourse to just say, no, it's not the same thing. It has a different name. That's not how it worked then. That's not what it looked like for the ancient world. So we see this archetype playing out. We see it playing out all over the world. We've got some imagery here. In the top, I've got my AI robot image of Dumuzid. We've got an image of Adonis next to him. We've got Dumuzid and Inanna in the middle down there. We've got Baal over here. We've got Attis of Phrygia over here on the right. These are all the same archetype, all the same deities, all the same story. So I want to go back to the mythic descent for just a moment. um, the way that they have it laid out in Kramer and Wolkstein's book is the courtship comes before. Now, we don't know for certain if the courtship myth comes after or before the descent myth. People have their opinions on it, but we don't have anything that says, yes, this. There's a chronological order to this. There's what we can tell with reconstruction, but the idea of them being married obviously kind of puts it in perspective for us. But we don't know the actual age of a lot of these. A lot of it's pieced together from different perspectives and different pieces that we found across time. The descent, I believe, if I remember correctly, is more Babylonian, later, much later than the Sumerian, and we can probably date the courtship as earlier. So the sacred marriage thing is probably earlier than the descent myth, and it doesn't really matter because of the way that the story plays out for us. It's just something I like to put in perspective as we look at this. So initially, Inanna, is told by her brother, "It's time. You are a woman now. It's time for you to take a mate." He kind of turns it on as though he should be the one to mate with her, which of course, in our perspective today, we're like, "Whoa, what are you doing, bro?" But eventually he turns it to, "You should marry Dumuzid." She rebuffs him. She's like, "No, I'm not interested in the shepherd. I want the farmer." This is interesting to me because if we look at what is going to be an echo later in the Hebrew Bible, we have the story of Cain and Abel. Cain being the agriculturalist, the one growing the vegetables, Abel being the shepherd, being the one selected. We have that selection happening here as well, except for instead of some, uber god, we have a goddess who is making this decision. And it is one of a sacred covenant, a sacred marriage, which we'll see play out again and again. So initially she rebuffs the farmer, or the shepherd. The wool would be too coarse for my skin. She has all these reasons for why not the shepherd. Then she comes to the the realization that, okay, maybe we should go for the shepherd thing. Um, and just like in the story in Genesis, the shepherd is chosen over the farmer, which shows us, at least as an idea of what's happening in antiquity. And this is deep, deep, deep in antiquity. We're talking way Bronze Age, way, way back. This movement from agricultural society to pastoral society. And what are those differences, right? The main thing that I think we should fix our minds on when we're thinking about this in particular is the idea of dominion over the earth. The idea of dominion and rulership over the feminine. The earth itself, in many of the older myths, we see here Dumuzid being an aspect of the earth, this vegetative god. We see the same thing in Osiris. We see the same thing in Osiris's father, Geb. Geb is the god of earth, and the goddess of sky, Nut, is the goddess. We don't see a flip to sky god and earth mother until much later. And I think we're starting to see it here first. In ancient Sumer, this story where Inanna chooses the shepherd over the farmer. The shepherd is interested in husbandry. And it's so funny that we say that, husbandry, right? Husbandry is the term for what we do with animals. The domestication, raising, and slaughtering of animals, or the usage of their byproduct for our civilization. We call it husbandry because it is associated directly with Dumuzid. That is why it's called husbandry, because it's directly related to the goddess's husband. So she selects him, they fall in love. There's all this wonderful erotic poetry, which we'll get into later because it relates directly to Song of Songs, and we'll get there. But then, after that celebration is over, Inanna has come into her full character. Inanna has come into her fullness as a woman. And now it's time for her final test. That's why she goes through that descent. She goes through the descent. And in Inanna's absence, we get the first warnings of the ancient world about the overuse of power. This husband who's involved in dominion, kingship, he takes over the kingship in the end of the courtship myth. He takes over for her. And she goes on this descent into the underworld. What does he do with that power? This myth is a warning not to overuse your power, not to overuse it, right? So he claims the throne without the right to. He has no concern for his partner as she's down there. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't lift a finger, so on and so forth. That's a warning. Don't do that. You have to honor the sacred marriage. You have to honor the marriage with the divine. After that, when she comes back, she sees him not honoring it and she takes it away. This is another warning. If you do not honor that sacred relationship with the divine, it can and it will be stripped away. She fastens the eye of death upon him and she sends him to the underworld. As we noticed from the video last night, he flees like a little coward and he tries to weasel his way out of it any which way he can. And so what we see is, like I said, a warning, but a transmission of power. It is a change of hands of where that power is going. So we see him go from divine shepherd in the sacred marriage to this new ritual where half the year he is held in the underworld, and the other half of the year his sister Geshtinana is held in the underworld. So it's another occurrence of divine power being balanced, or that's the attempt anyway. It doesn't hold over time, but we see it continue. So this is where it gets really interesting to me. We have this story of the shepherd who becomes divine, who becomes king, and then becomes divine, and then we start to see that narrative change as time goes on, as time marches on. So this is from a song that's been refabricated, reconstructed. The Lord meets her for whom lapis lazuli was gathered from the heap. Dumuzid meets Inanna for whom lapis lazuli was gathered from the heap. A shepherd of On, the servant of Enlil, the Lord meets her. The servant of On, the herdsman of Enlil, Dumuzid meets her. The Lord meets her at the lapis lazuli door, which stands in the Jippar shrine. Dumuzid meets her at the narrow door which stands in the storehouse of Iana. That's the house of Inanna. That is her holy temple. Well, we see this same imagery continue in many, many, many of the books of the Bible. Hear us, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. You who sit enthroned between the cherubim, shine forth. Restore us, O God. Make your face shine upon us that we may be saved. You would think that a monotheistic idea would stop using the same imagery from a polytheistic religion. What I'm getting at today is that what we are looking at is the continuation of these polytheistic things within the very document that people are using to say that these things aren't real. There are people out there who are like, no, 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 all this other stuff is fake. All this other stuff is just mythology. Dude, it's in your book. It is in the book that you're talking about. The shepherd imagery is all over the Bible, from Genesis on. From Genesis, from Psalms, from Ezekiel, in Revelations, in the Gospels. It's everywhere. There's no escaping it. They are talking about Dumuzid. They are talking about the shepherd because that is what was happening in the late antique world. And what happened was he began to absorb powers. The cult of Dumuzid began to absorb different gods and goddesses as he changed land to land. And what I think is interesting is it seems to follow a pattern that we see in Abraham's journey as well. We see explicit shepherd deities across the Near East. We see pastoral imagery in the hymns and the poetry. We see the image of the crook becoming the staff of authority or the scepter of authority. And we see the authority over animals become the authority over men. We see the imagery shift from that sheep to sheep meaning people, the sheepfold, the flock. So this sacred marriage, the Hyros Gamos, was a ritual reenactment that supposedly happened between the king of Sumer and the priestess of the goddess Inanna's temple. Now, symbolic union was believed to ensure the fertility and the prosperity of the land and its people. There's some talk of it specifically being an actual sexual union where the king would go into the sacred temple and lay with the high priestess. Chances of that are probably pretty small considering some like the ideas of purity or virginity around the high priestess, but sacred prostitution is a thing that definitely occurred. And so we can kind of guesstimate, was it all symbolic, was it just a ceremony, or was it something that happened and it became a ceremony? Doesn't matter. What we're told is there is a sacred union between the kingship and the house of the goddess until later. And then later, that is when we start to see it switch to this Abrahamic idea of Yahweh. It signifies in this moment this idea of Dumuzid and his kind of fall, I think signals to us a very specific cultural change in that region. And what we will see is that it leads us to this road now of this monotheistic uber god. Replayed. Now, this is from Song of Songs. This is a book in the Bible that people are like, why is this here? It's a really, really beautiful text. It's got a lot of incredible poetry and a lot of potency with it. But if you read it if you're reading through that book and you come to Song of Songs, you're like, this is a different thing all of its own. And you look at it and you go, why did they choose to include this? Why did they choose to keep this? Why did they choose to keep this if their aim is to say that there is only one God and nothing else matters? If they're trying to abolish everything, why keep this? It's because the sacred marriage, the Hyros Gamos, is incredibly important. It's incredibly important to humanity in general. We have to have this link to the divine, and the sacred marriage is how we keep that going. And this image of the sacred marriage changes across time. Where do we find our link to the divine? Tell me, you whom I love so well, where do you pasture your sheep? Where do you rest them at noon? Let me not be as one who strays beside the flocks of your fellows. It's really beautiful. A lot of really heavily erotic poetry, just smack right in the middle of the Bible, which I'm sure just gets glossed over in a lot of churches. The shepherd symbolism continues. Look at David. Look at King David. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me to water in places of repose. He renews my life. He guides me in right paths as befits his name. Though I walk through a valley of deepest darkness, that is a chthonic reference. He's talking about the underworld. I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Rod and staff, that's Dumuzid. You spread a table before me in full view of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. There's anointing happening in the courtship marriage to Inanna with Dumuzid. You anoint my head with oil. My drink is abundant. Again, when he's talking, and this was in the video last night that we unveiled, his drink cup, very important. His drink cup is stripped from him by the Gala demons. Only goodness and steadfast love shall pursue me in all the days of my life. I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for many long years. This is a prayer of fertility and abundance based on the relationship with the shepherd god, the shepherd deity. You see it again in Ezekiel 34. Seek out my sheep and rescue them from all the places where they were scattered. I will tend to my sheep and make them lie down. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. Now, you don't think of a shepherd as a medic, but if he has this underworld chthonic aspect associated with him, then you can see him as a healer god as well. Most of the healer gods do have either a solar aspect or some sort of underworld connection in order for them to gain their healing power. So let's just look. If all of these other gods by different names are not real things, why the hell is the Bible littered with shepherds? Every single major character throughout most of the Torah, and then even after the Torah, when we get into later books like Psalms, and even later on with the advent of Jesus Christ, it's all this shepherd motif. The God that Abraham finds in the desert, or in his journeys, that tells him to leave Ur, is Dumuzid. It has to be. It has to be. We've got Abel the shepherd. We have Abraham, Lot, Rachel, Jacob, Isaac, all of them. Moses, even for a time after he left Egypt, became a shepherd of Midian. David, the shepherd who would become king. The Hebrew Bible emphasizes the shepherd's role in caring for and guiding the flock, representing God's relationship with his people and the responsibility that human leaders have to that nature. The hymns, the sacred literature of Dumuzid focus on the shepherd god's connection to nature, to fertility, to the cycles of life and death. These common ideas of care and guidance keep coming up. We have to care for the flock. We have to care for the flock. This is about our relationship with the earth. That's what they're talking about in all of these ancient texts. Where is our relationship with the earth at? What are we doing sitting in this, castle of our own that we have now? What are we doing with our power? What are we doing with our dominion? And then you slowly see it change from shepherd to steward to a universal monarch. And over time, what we see happen is this monarchy. This monarchy as Dumuzid moves through time. And it's funny, I was looking at this during my exploration, getting ready for this, and it's kind of mapped out in Abraham and his journey itself. He leaves Ur, which is the center of worship for Inanna and Sin, the god of the moon, where sacred marriage rituals would have occurred. And in those first few moments, when Abraham is told to leave, to go seek out a new land, he's told to leave the land of his forebears. There's a covenant made. There's a covenant made with Abraham, a sacred marriage, if you will. And what's interesting is in these verses, there's also the idea of household gods traveling with Abraham. So Abraham was a polytheist. Abraham had many gods. It wasn't just Abraham had many sons. Abraham had many gods that traveled with him. We are dealing with a culture that was polytheistic up until the Babylonian exile. They were not monotheist, and we have to get rid of that notion. So he leaves Ur under the power of a covenant. He comes to Shechem at the Mamre oak tree, and he creates an altar. An altar to who? Now, what people would think and say right out of the gates is an altar to Yahweh. No, altar poles were made to Asherah, the consort of Yahweh, to Inanna, essentially. We know this because that was her symbol, the oak tree. Now, the Mamre tree, the oak tree, is exactly where he sets up the first altar. He moves on then. He sets up another altar in the house of El. El is a direct reference to Enlil, Enlil, the father of Inanna. All of these names referred to in the first parts of the Bible, in the first parts of Abraham and his quest, El Shaddai, El Elyon, El Roy, El Elam. These are not Yahweh. This is not the God Yahweh. Yahweh and Yahwism is a much later development that happens even after Moses. And so what we're looking at here is, if we look back in time, these people are carrying the religious texts of ancient Sumer with them as they travel. He ends up in Egypt, and then he dies in Canaan. And that's where he founds the Cave of the Patriarch. I think there's something interesting there to explore. This caves always being an underworld aspect. Obviously, just burial in general, you could bury someone anywhere, but the burial in a cave suggests some sort of underworld transformation that's potentially happening. I don't know that. The symbolism is there for why would you choose that in the land of Canaan. Now, this is not far from Bethel, where the worship would be of El and the consort Asherah. In a polytheistic time, you would be buried in this land and be serving some Yahweh god. It doesn't make any sense because he hadn't really come around yet. He was there, but not very well known. Let's look at this. Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse the ones who curse you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. This is an echo of what is promised, and we read it earlier, to Dumuzid. I'm going to bless you. This covenant, this sacred marriage between Inanna and Dumuzid, the king, is replayed here in the Torah, which is of course written by Moses, supposedly. Moses being much later than Abraham by nearly 5, maybe even more, hundreds of years. So this is something that we're seeing replayed here. The sacred marriage covenant happens again. He sets up the altars. When they arrived in the land of Canaan, Abraham passed through the land as the side of Shechem, where the terebinth of Morah, the Asherah poles, were set up. And then God appeared to Abraham. I will assign this land to your offspring. Now, who has the power to do that? Who has the power to do that other than an order from on high, right? And he built an altar there. Now, these altars are poles. They're wooden poles. That's the idea at that time anyways. And from there he moves on to the hill country, to the house of El, Bethel, that's what that term means, and pitched his tent with Bethel in the west, and he builds an altar there as well. So he's visiting all these sacred sites that are polytheistic. We are dealing with a polytheistic religion at this point. So my question is, who is this deity that comes to Abraham? Who is this deity that comes to Moses? Two shepherds, entreated by a deity, has to be the shepherd guy, right? Just makes the most sense. Let's go with the simplest answer here. Let's see how this has changed over time. And I wish I'd moved this slide earlier, but Osiris and Isis, we're talking about this dismemberment myth, potentially older than 5000 BC. That would put it 7,000 years ago and change. Then we have Inanna and Dumuzid, 3000 to 2000 BC. Then we have Ishtar and Tammuz, 2000 to 1500 BC. Now we're getting into the range, somewhere in between 2000 and 1500, of where we can kind of anticipate where Abraham was. So at that time, you can see Dumuzid moving out of that area. We have the idea of the Babylonian, Ishtar and Tammuz, where the partnership is maintained, but you can see male power growing. The Tammuz cult is bigger than the Inanna cult was in ancient Sumer. Sacred marriage continues. You can still see it. The sacred ritual mourning is still there, but you have a growing male priesthood. As we move through time, Sybil and Attis further out. See how Abraham moved through all this area in the mythic structure of the Hebrew Bible, and then you get over here, Sybil and Attis, Phrygia. That's going to be in Anatolia. That's a little bit more west. You see it happen again. Yahweh and Asherah start to pop up and be more important. 1000 to 800 BC. These are rough dates, by the way. Aphrodite and Adonis, 1200 to 800. The same story. But by the time we get to like 800, 600, Yahwism starts to pick up. Yahwism starts to absorb these different aspects, and Yahwism takes over finally after the Babylonian exile. So Babylonian exile happens around 584 or 3, and then 538 is when they come back, and that's when the temple period begins, the second temple period. Somewhere in the time of 100 to 800 is where you see David. So even the Psalms, what we're looking at in the Psalms with King Solomon, Solomon is known in his temple to have Asherah iconography. It's a polytheistic temple in the time of Solomon. It's a polytheistic society in the time of David. We don't see a unilateral absolute monarch until much later. But we do see over time the acquisition of different powers to this super uber god. Dumuzid starts out as just a shepherd, mortal, becomes a fertility god. He's a consort. He gets elevated to divinity. He's associated with the agricultural cycles, seasonal death, seasonal mourning happens, seasonal ritual mournings happen. Then, as we move to Tammuz, over time, he gets more and more cult. He gets more and more prominence in the cities. Dumuzid had his own city in the time of Inanna, but as you see in the myth as well, she has basically all 7 cities, all of the 7 major civic centers. He has kind of like secondary status in one of them. By the time you get to Tammuz and Ishtar, Tammuz has cult in every city. And I think it's possible, of course, that they had all of this in every city, but it's pretty clear that they had specific cities that had a specific deity. And if we trust the mythic structure or what they were writing down, Inanna had all 7. So slowly he's chipping away. As you get to Adonis, you start to see more solar attributes. This midsummer solar ritual that they had associated with Adonis starts to give solar attributes to this god. And then we have El and Baal. You start to get the absorption of those characters. They start to fade. And then you have Yahweh starting to get the powers of creation, the powers of the storm, which used to be Inanna's function. El Shaddai, mountain god. So they, we're stripping something from Ninhursag. Ninhursag, I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sure. And then by the time we get to Yahweh, he has absorbed all of the different powers that other deities would have had. So this is very clear that what is happening in that ancient Near East is a movement. Now, by who? The people of the time, the priestly class. Even in the sources that come before, we start to see this movement happen. This slide here is some of the dates of when we can date certain sources that came together to become what would be the Hebrew Bible much later. Now, remember, keep in mind, that is not fully put together in its current form until after the Common Era. So, this idea of it being some ancient text that supersedes even the Greek text is insane in some regards, like because it's not even codified, it's not even set down yet. There are pieces and fragments that are pulled in, and you can start to see, even if you just pick it up and read it yourself, there are different voices across time speaking to you. The J source dating back to 950 BCE, so that's potentially 600 years ish and change after Moses, potentially, and at 1500 BCE. So we don't have anything dating back any more than the J source at this point, where we have shepherd imagery, we have the divine feminine present, but it's diminished. The E source, we start to see this abstract deity change form. By the time we get to Josiah's reforms with the D source, we have the centralization of the worship, and we have the centralization of a cult, and the essentially the banning of the divine feminine. That's at that point. So, over time, Dumuzid absorbs all of these pieces, absorbs all of these functions, absorbs all of the stations, absorbs all of the cults, and we have a dramatic theological transformation happening. And it starts to happen outside of this particular structure. It's not just the Hebrews that start to see this happen. We see this in the Orphic material as well. I've written a couple of pieces on Substack about this. You see it in the Orphic hymn to Zeus, this idea of a monotheistic world coming into crystal clear picture, not just in one culture. It starts to happen even with the Orphics. And I'll provide a link to that in the description after this. But we see the destruction of the divine feminine. And this is, again, just look at what happened when we didn't follow that warning. There's a couple more pieces here I want to touch on. How we see this continue. We see this continue. The mourning rituals. This is a piece from Sappho, who was a Greek poetess in Lesbos. And this was her lament for Adonis. Cytherea, thy dainty Adonis is dying. Ah, what shall we do? O nymphs, let it echo, the voice of your crying, the greenwood through. O forest maidens, smite on the breast, rend ye the delicate woven vest. Let the wail ring through wild and high. Ah, for Adonis cry. O Sappho, how canst thou chant the bliss of Cyprus after such a day as this? O Adonis, thou leavest me, woe for my lot, and Eros my servant availeth me not. So wails Cytherea, grief distraught. Who shall console me for thee? There is none, not Ares my god-lover, passionate one, who sware in his jealousy forth to hail Hephaestus my spouse from his palace, if he dared but to lift his eyes unto me. Not he can console me, Adonis for thee. Wail for Adonis, wail. This goes back to the wailing that we see in Dumuzid in his dream. O step, set up a wail for me. O crabs in the river, mourn for me. O frogs in the river, call for me. O my mother Surtur, weep for me. If she does not find the 5 breads, if she does not find the 10 breads, if she does not know the day I am dead, you, O step, tell her, tell my mother. On the step, my mother will shed tears for me. On the step, my little sister will mourn for me. This idea of women ritually mourning the dying god. It's happening all over the Near East. And it happens again. And it continues to happen in Christianity with the lament to Mary. This is from a dude in early Christianity, Jacob of Saru. The harlot heard the report of him from afar as she was standing in the street, going astray with idols, playing the wench with carved images. She loved, she much desired him, and when he was far away and begged him to admit her into his chamber, Let the much desired bridegroom kiss me. With the kisses of his mouth let me be blessed. I have heard of him from afar. May I see him near, and may I place my lips upon his and be delighted by seeing him with my eyes. Your breasts are better to me than wine, for the fragrance of your sweetness is life forevermore. With your milk shall I be nourished, with your fragrance shall I grow sweet from the smoke of idols, which with its rank odor did make me fetid. Draw me after you into your fold, for I am a sheep gone astray in the world. After you do I run, and your converse do I seek, that in me may be completed that number of 100 by means of the lost one which is found. Let Gabriel rejoice and be exceedingly glad for the company of all the angels in you, the good shepherd, who on your shoulders carried the maimed sheep, that the number of 100 might be preserved. Shepherd iconography again and again and again. You see this taken over and over and over. I don't understand how it's not more or like more evident to everybody, and it's because people aren't reading it. But when you read these stories, whether it's the stories of Inanna and her descent, the stories of her love and marriage with Dumuzid, the stories of Adonis and Aphrodite, of Attis and Sybil, of Osiris and Isis, even with here the lament of Mary to the Christ bridegroom, and us, the human beings in this case. See, Christianity just flips it on its head, right? Before it was the goddess and the people through the king. Then it becomes Yahweh and the people through the Christ, the King of Kings, right? This is the same religion being played out. It's the same thing. It's the same stories. There's no difference here other than the power structures that have been put in place are oppressive over certain portions of the population. So what I'm getting at, and what a lot of the things in this channel are about, is trying to show that these things are telling the same stories. Myself personally, I tend to look at these things as um, different facets, different cultural perspectives. Everything is perspective. Everything in our lives is perspective. I have a different perspective than you. You have a different perspective than the next person. We have a different perspective now than we would have had in late antiquity or in the deep Bronze Age. Everything is perspective. And it's up to us to see these things if we want to see them, if we want to hear them. We have to open our eyes and open our ears to see that these are the same stories being told through different cultural lenses. After seeing all these pieces, I wonder if you have any questions. Do you have anything for me today? If you guys just want to talk about the video from last night or talk about what we've presented here so far, I think I'm out of slides after this one. But what I wanted to get at ultimately was that what we see in Dumuzid is the prototype imagery of what the later Yahwistic God, the super uber God that we get in monotheism, is laying the groundwork for that many years before. So we see this starting to occur a long time back. And what I find the funniest about it, personally, is that we have people right now that are so blind to the fact that they are literally worshiping the shepherd god from ancient Sumer, and they're saying no idols. No idols. You can see it even here in Jacob of Saruz. He's talking about the disgustingness of idols and how they made him feel made the Virgin Mary feel fetid. And it's you read the erotic poetry of Inanna and Dumuzid, and it's right here again, thousands of years later, being replayed. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. I appreciate that comment. Um, it is important. It's important that we start to see that we have much more that binds us together than makes us different. Just because one culture has a different name for a deity doesn't mean that we need to to shut it out or to not learn from it, right? It's a detriment to our modern discourse if we are not looking at these things from a unified perspective, like as much as possible. How can we start to see the divine in everything? Um, how can we start to see that we've been telling the same stories since we started campfires? Like, we only have evidence, and I've only brought up the evidence of what we have available to us in text, but there thousands upon thousands of years that we were probably telling the story of some dude who died and went to the underworld and was risen again over and over. And just because somebody decided that theirs was the right version is why we've been in this position that we're in now. Ogre Girl says, I'm definitely over all the lies for sure. Was literally just finishing a conversation about precisely that and hopped on here. Yeah, it's all there. We just need to do the research. And I'm happy to do it for a lot of people if that's what people need. But ultimately, it's all right in front of our faces. You pick it up, and it's really if we're ready to see it. Like, you could show these same verses to somebody who's not ready to see it, and they'll just see what they want to see. They won't see that Dumuzid is the same as the God of the Bible, the shepherd God of the Bible. They won't see it because they don't want to. Curious how you might shoehorn the Set archetype into the larger narrative. Well, I mean, I did do the video on Osiris and talked about Set quite a bit. Um, there's elements of Set in Yahweh. I mean, uh, by the time you get to the monotheistic super god that is Yahweh, he's basically absorbed all of the attributes of all the other deities. Um, and so I think more often than not, people probably try to make Set into a satanic thing or an adversary, right? Um, and that's not accurate, at least not to the Egyptian perspective and how they thought about it. As an agent of chaos and an agent of the desert, I think that there are some Sethian tendencies with a shepherd god that you find in the desert. Um, you're welcome. You're welcome. YSMLT says this is so good, valuable, and expressed so much of what I've been currently thinking about. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad it's resonating with people. I do love sharing this, and I hope that you'll continue to join me on these, not only in the videos that come out when I premiere them, but also these deep dives. Thank you, Mystic Mia. Thank you. I think it is important. I think it is important that we start to see that these stories um, still hold weight. They still can teach us about our current time. And if you're really looking for something that's fun, I mean, go and read The Courtship of Inanna yourself and learn what you can about love, and what that means. It's beautiful, beautiful poetry. Brian says, "Did Set absorb the shepherd? He is the usurper." Well, I think that there is some of that, right? This usurper motif is there, but what I find interesting is, and we'll go over this when I do the next video, the final video of the Inanna descent myth, is what Inanna goes and does. She goes and she basically pardons him because he's fallible. He made a mistake. And in her infinite love for humanity, she pardons him with the help of his sister, who decides to basically take it for him again. Um, so it's there's still some value there for us. What does Dumuzid's story mean to you? How can we use that to make better decisions, in life? Um, Instead of, once we get a little taste of power, what do we do with it? What do we do with it? Are we falling in line with the cosmic order? Now, Inanna represents that cosmic order. Um, Inanna represents it, and if the story is accurate, which I'm going to assume it is, that's what they wanted to tell us. That's what they wanted to tell themselves. Is that if you fall outside of that cosmic order, you pay the price. And going and dying and becoming a part of the underworld is that price. Things will fall apart because it doesn't just talk about how he dies, right? Big deal. Everybody dies. It's what happens to him. The Gala demons, they come up and they smack him in each cheek with a rusty nail, and they beat him up and they scratch him and they gouge him and they create gashes on him. Like they shatter all of his symbols of power, which is, again, the story is a warning for people who would be in this position of power and not use it within the cosmic order. The cosmic order was that for if Inanna was to die, all should mourn. If the heavenly order should die, then all should be mourning. But the king didn't mourn. And that's I think the real nut of the story. The moral of the story is the dude should have been mourning, but he wasn't. Which speaks to potentially that in history that we don't know, there was probably some king who didn't do something right, and he paid the price for it. And that's where a lot of myth and stories come from, is from a particular person in history not doing something correctly. Ogre Girl says, took a history of religion class, and the book had a timeline of all the big religions starting from the inside cover to the back. It appeared to be the same person if reincarnation is real. Possible. We don't know. It's a mystery. That's what we're here to discover in On the Mysteries. Do we have any other questions? I'm available for a little bit more time, guys, so I'll just stick around and answer any questions you might have, whether it's relevant to this or anything else. Starting next week on Wednesday, I'm going to do a more open forum live, and then we'll do the Friday live based on the content that's coming out that week, and then we'll also have the Wednesday lives. Enoch was the good one. Enoch's got an interesting story. Enoch does have an interesting story. I'll get to that eventually. Currently, what I've got on tap for the channel is exploring the Orphic mysteries and their connection to Genesis, and Inanna and her descent, and that connection to what eventually becomes this kind of like this first seed of monotheism out of the Near East, because we do see monotheism creep up in the New Kingdom with the Akhenaten, Aten, Amarna religion that happens. Yeah, I'm surprised more people don't take a history of religion class in their post high school. I don't know how many high schools offer that anymore, but I know they offer them at the collegiate level. I took quite a few. That was my jam. That, philosophy, and storytelling, which is why I'm here making videos. It is. Mystic Mia says, been studying Inanna and Tammuz for many years. The Hyros Gamos is interwoven through so much of the modern ritual. It is. Oh yeah, the song. Well, I can play that again for you guys real quick, and if you have any questions, I can answer them after the song. I'll just go ahead and fire it up again.
Started as a shepherd, now I'm sitting on a throne, while the queen of heaven's hanging cold and all alone. Thinking I could take it, thinking I could make it mine. From pastoral to capital, watch my power shine. They ain't know my father was the lord of wisdom deep. Enki's son with plans to make the cosmos mine to keep. From shepherd to sovereign, watch the staff become a sword. From lover to tyrant, now they call me Lord. Now they call me Lord. But every throne's got a price to pay, and demons come to collect one day. Sister tried to warn me in the visions of the night. Saw the reeds all bending, saw my power take flight. But I was drunk on glory, drunk on heaven's wine, thinking I could transform partnership to all is mine. Now the gala coming can't escape their righteous wrath. Every shepherd king must walk that lonely path. Transform my hands, transform my feet. Let me escape what I can't defeat. But you can't run from cosmic law when you try to take what wasn't yours. This ain't just history, this pattern still remains. From balance power to dominion's chains. Every king who claims he rules by right divine, walking in my footsteps thinking power's his to shine. But the queen of heaven's judgment echoes through the years. Every throne built on betrayal ends in tears. Started as a shepherd, ended as a shade. Cosmic usurpation is a deadly trade. Let my story warn you about the price of power, when you trade eternal truth for one brief hour. When you trade eternal truth for one brief hour. When you trade eternal truth for one brief hour. When you trade eternal truth for one brief hour.
That one came out all right. That song came out all right. It's not as cool as Dragon Mother Rising was, but they can't all be bangers, right? Looks like YSMLT says, how did you come about all those things? What was it that pulled you toward these subjects and matters? That's a damn good question. I've always been a kind of obsessive over mythology in general and stories and what their deeper meanings were for me personally. Um, and then over the years, just my own practice in ritual has led me even deeper. And so now, what what this project is and what has come out of me is a dedication, really, to the gods, to this idea of divinity in everything, and trying to at least help people see that it is in all of these things and not in just one person's idea or ideology. We find it in everything. Sonoro Pro Sound says, I have the same POV. I'm looking for the connection between the Indian story and the same time of the chariots. Are you talking about Hinduism, Sonoro? Um, I mean, there's you start to see, if we want to go over that eventually, I probably will on this channel. There is heavy crossover in the Rig Veda and Zeus and the storm gods of the ancient Near East. So yeah. So the Rig Veda is very much, you go and read that thing. It is beautiful, beautiful poetry, beautiful hymns, and it's rich with Indra being very similar to Zeus. And then they also have all the Soma references, which are really interesting, and I would like to talk about those someday. I'm glad things are making sense now, Anne. The veil has collapsed. Yeah, I think so. I think there are things happening, um, where truth is shining through, where the bubble that we were living in for quite some time as a society has burst, and truth has a funny way of coming out. No matter how well hidden it is, eventually the truth shines through. And I think we are experiencing a lot of that. We are experiencing a lot of that right now. Truth is rising, Dragon Mother's rising. Just a few more minutes, guys. If you have any more questions, any more things you want to talk about, or if there's a specific topic you want me to cover on the channel, just let me know, and I will put it in the queue. No, thank you, thank you. It's truly a privilege to bring this stuff to you guys on such a scale, and it's a privilege to be appreciated as much as I have been in such a short time on this channel. It takes people a long time to get to 5,000 subscribers, let alone how quickly we did it here on this channel. Um, takes people years sometimes just to get 1,000 and get monetized and all that. So the fact that we've moved mountains in this regard says that this is being well received, and I appreciate that. Yes, and time to take out the trash. All right, guys. Well, I will leave you to it. I want to thank everybody for joining me here on the live stream today. Next week, we are going to be talking about Chronos. We're going back to the Orphic Mysteries for a minute. I've got a new piece that I'm in the works of doing, Chronos and the blade that severed the heavens from the earth. And then next Friday, we'll do the live stream on the metaphysics of time in the Orphic perspective. What is it that happens when Kronos takes that adamantine sickle that Gaia forged for him and cuts off the generative capacity of Oranos? And what comes from that? It's one of my favorite tales in mythology. Is what comes from that is that rending of the of the heavens comes Aphrodite, comes the goddess of beauty and love and those sorts of things. And so I can't wait to get into that topic. That's coming next Friday. And hopefully next Thursday I'll have the Chronos video done in time. But still a lot of work to do on that one, and the Titans themselves. There's a lot of work to do before we even get to the Olympians, and I'm excited about that one. Mystic Mia says, "Can you talk about the Dragon Mother?" Well, I mean, we did with the Gaia video and the Gaia live stream. What else more do you want to know? Because I mean, from an Orphic perspective, it's all really that draconic mother, um, and it's very evident that that's what we're dealing with here. This current resurgence is this kind of draconic mother. Just look at the way the Earth is reacting to our overreach, to our Shepherd King overreach. Hush money? Who's got hush money? Thanks, RS. Thank you, brother. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to fire things down. Enjoy. Get at me. Comment on the video. Share it. Do all the things that make the channel grow. And I will see you guys next week, Wednesday, open forum live stream. We'll be talking about, I think I put up there, modern praxis. how to practice this stuff in the modern age in 2025, how to bring ancient wisdom into modern praxis in 2025. That's what it was. And we'll talk about whatever you guys want. And then we'll have Chronos on Thursday and Chronos again on Friday. And that's where we're at, guys. Thanks a bunch.